Okay.
Okay. I am having a wonderful chat in Jacksonville, Florida, or near thereabouts, with the composer pianist, and I really want to emphasize that composer pianist. I think I'm okay there, right? Gary Smart, Dr. Gary Smart. We're going to be talking about his 2016 Albany Records release. We think 2016-17. Anyway, the recordings were done in the 2015, so usually the CD's released a little later. I couldn't quite find that. It doesn't matter. It's an Albany Records release. That's what matters.
Oh,
Very big and important label. Congratulations. The
thank
CD is called Bright Eyed Fancy, the chamber music of Gary Smart, and we'll talk about this Bright Eyed Fancy business. Here's what's on this CD. Take out your notebooks, those of you who are clarinetists, who are a piano trio, those of you who play clarinet and tenor sax, etc. Here it goes. Prayer for solo clarinet. We will talk about that piece. That is a beauty. That's a beauty. Bright-Eyed
you.
Fancy for violin, cello, and piano, wonderful. Child's Play in I think what is it, 3, 4 movements for clarinet and tenor saxophone. Talk about color. And I don't know, comedy and conversation and narrative and all that good stuff. Hello, clarinetist and tenor saxophonist. It's fabulous. Mandela for clarinet and piano, beautiful. Just playing a magnificent piece of music for clarinet and piano.
Oh, my goodness, thank you.
And Sonata in Fancy, once again that word, for hello, the most beautiful, exciting colors, vibraphone and piano. Two percussive instruments, of course, but what fabulous colors. That's the music on this CD, Bright Eyed Fancy. Let's tell everybody who you are. Dr. Gary Smart, I'm going to call you Gary from here on out. Presidential professor, now I hope that means a palace, a presidential professor at the University of North Florida School of Music in Jacksonville, educated at Indiana University, yes, yes, did some fancy stuff at the Hochschule für Musik in Cologne. Then, of course, the important thing, hello, DMA from Yale. That's where I begin. My knees begin to shake a little bit. I quiver in my insecurities. Yaleys are incredibly intelligent, wonderful, fabulous human beings that change the world. So I congratulate you on that. And winner of zillions of awards, National Endowment for the Arts, among others, Guggenheim Foundation. So that's the guy we're talking to, and we're going to speak about your music. And as I discussed with you earlier, I think I want to just well, first of all, I need a little background. I couldn't find much, and I think and what I mean is not the college degrees, but just people really want to kind of know when the bug bit, and it's usually at a young age or not, and so on.
Yeah,
Give me an idea.
yeah, it definitely was. I well, I was a kind of a child prodigy, but I grew up in a coal mining farming town in central Illinois, so they didn't even know that word. I was just a little kid that could do a lot of things. Um, but at age 5, and I remember it vividly, a man came to our home and he tuned the piano. And after he tuned the piano, he played, and he played for about an hour. And I remember his name even. His name was Petey James, and he'd been a silent music pianist. He was an old, well, he looked like us. He had white hair, and he played ragtime. He played, I don't know, La Gazaladra Overture on the piano. He played stride piano. He played Chopin. He played everything. Now, most of that stuff, I didn't know what in the world it was, but my parents were impressed, and my nose was right up to the keyboard. He thought I was cute. Right after he left, I said, I want to do that. I want to play that. I need lessons. I bugged my parents for a long 6 months or so. Finally, they said, you're too young. You'll find that you have no patience for this. But okay, you can start lessons. And that was, I started with a neighborhood lady, and she, after a few months, said, I can't teach this kid anymore. And they started driving me first 10 miles away for lessons. A couple of years later, they were driving me up to Peoria, which is 50 miles away. And I took only classical lessons. And my teacher, wonderful lady named Miss Adelaide, she kept saying, you're not learning any of that jazz stuff now, are you? You're not playing any popular music. Because at that point, we could go to the local drugstore. My little town was 1,000, but you could buy sheet music, the latest Hoagie Carmichael or something like that. This would be like late 40s by that
That's
point.
because that's because everybody still had a piano in their home.
They did. Yeah, yeah. All my aunts played piano. It wasn't that big a deal playing piano. It was just, why was I so interested in it when I was such a young kid? But anyway, I started playing little concerts and stuff by the time I was 8 or 9, just for the local church and things like that. Um, but I also was a basketball player. I was all state my senior year. Um, I, I I just had a wonderful childhood, and music was part of it, but it was integrated into a very normal upbringing. When I got to Indiana, it only took a couple of weeks, and I was astounded. I loved the university, and I loved my colleagues and the professor. I couldn't believe it. It was a wonderful time in the early 60s to go to college because all of those people that had left Europe,
Hmm.
that had just gotten out by the skin of their teeth. My first composition teacher was Bernard Haydn. He was a Hindemith protege. And, the piano teachers, everybody. I mean, it was a wonderful crop of people. And I called my parents at Thanksgiving and said, I don't need to come home. I don't really need to. They said, no, you're coming home. I loved it that much. I wanted to just stay and be in the library and practice in the practice rooms because I grew up kind of solitary. And in jazz and all that stuff, sight reading, that stuff, I was improvising. That was all kind of self-taught because my teacher taught me classical. That was all.
And
And
promised that she would take a ruler to your fingers were you to be caught playing jazz.
just about. She was quite a lady. I remember my dad came in for a lesson one time, and she was under the piano. This is a lady in a dress, on her fours, slapping my feet when I pedal wrong. No, slap. No, no, that's ridiculous. No. It was, and my dad said, that is a strange lady you're studying with. And I said, she knows her stuff, though. She really did. And she cared. So that was great.
Are you
But
kidding? She was on all fours, slapping your feet. Of course she cared. You know what I mean? In other words, the love of hard people, sort of. You know.
absolutely, yeah. And
Yeah.
she was smart and she was caring. She was very feeling. She was a great teacher. She was what they called at that time an old maid. You know, she lived into her 90s and she taught grade school and high school kids all that time. But she had studied with some well-known people, including the Levines, Rosina Levine, and her husband. Well, I can't remember his name, but um,
Oscar. Was it Oscar Levine?
what's that? Oscar Levine? No, 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 no,
No.
no.
Sorry.
No, that was the Gershwin fellow. I can't remember, but a
Yeah, doesn't matter.
famous late romantic pianist. But anyway, that's my background basically. And then from Indiana, suddenly the world opened up, and I was open to all influences. But
But
I
you
think
were, but let me just
I,
ask, let me just jump in for a second. You know, there's a difference, a very important difference about those opportunities that open up. And if I understand correctly, you came from a small town and were really essentially thrust into Indiana, which you thrived on. But you know, some people it scares them back into the village.
I I know that, and yeah, particularly at that time. Well, this is not really about the music school but so much, but Indiana accepted, I guess, all Indianans at that time. And um, in my dorm, there were 32 kids, and at the end of the second semester, 30 of them had flunked out.
Oh wow!
And yeah, so not only there were, yeah, you were free to come there, but you were free to fail too.
So who
Um,
sent you to Yale for your PhD? You yourself or
I,
DMA? Excuse
me,
me.
myself, and I will be truthful, um, over a period of about 10 years or something, I think I applied to go to Yale when I went to Indiana and I didn't get in. And I think I tried once right out of Indiana. Didn't get, so it was a big deal for me. I don't know why I had it in my mind, but I wanted to go there.
So it
Um,
wasn't particularly a composition teacher or a pianist or anything?
no, no, it was the institution itself. I knew who Hindemith was because, as I say, course, he was gone at that point, and the place had changed some. Uh,
But
my time at Yale,
nevertheless, it is still for God, for country, and for Yale. Yes.
that's right. Yeah. Well, and it's a great school. It may be a much better school than when I was there now. I think it's really a wonderful place. Um, but I had a great time there, and it was not just because of the professors. It was because of my colleagues. You know, all of the people that I worked with there. It was just and when you're ready for grad school, it's different than being an undergrad. You're ready to really soak it up and to experiment, and you're more focused. Um, yeah, I was out. I think I did a Ford Foundation residency for 3 years and studied in Germany. Then I went back to grad school. I was ready for it then, and I respected it a little bit more and didn't take anything for granted. And thought this time is limited. I want to do certain things,
Thank
and
you.
I started writing for friends. You know,
Thank you for reminding me of just how lazy I am in my life. I always sit here with my jaw dropping to the floor as I interview so many people like yourself who busy, 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 double degree here, viola and cello there, and and all that. And by the way, seven symphonies, in between. It's just like, what? Do you never just hang out and watch the sunset? Give me a break.
Oh, I loaf a lot. Yeah.
Hey, tell us about the colleagues, indeed, who are on this wonderful CD, Bright Eyed Fancy. How you met them,
I,
or
I
when, or
don't
what?
want to leave anybody out.
Sure.
Well, the clarinetist you mentioned, he's moved on to Michigan State now, but he got tenure here at the University of North Florida. His name is Guy Yehuda. He's an Israeli, and actually got his doctorate at Indiana also. But just a wonderful performer, and yeah, I wrote the prayer for
So,
him.
yeah.
Actually, that was the newest piece on the album. That was written as a kind of a blessing when he got married, a little later than most, I guess. I don't know. He was in his 30s.
That's a
At,
little late, yeah, I think.
yeah, to
Smart.
another clarinetist. And very soon they had twin girls.
Sweet.
And I remember when I got the message, I said, I'm going to write you a little solo piano piece. Yeah. I mean, solo clarinet piece. And so that's where that came from. Um, he plays the Mandela piece, which is the oldest piece. I wrote that. That went through, and I do this, two or three, what should we say, incarnations. I kept working on it till I got it right. And
And by the way, there's a very important reason we believe, don't we, about the subconscious and so on. But can I just kind of keep us back a little bit? Why don't we talk about these pieces kind of one at a time, since we are there at this point in
okay,
the interview?
okay,
For
that's fine.
example,
Well, Guy plays on three of those pieces.
so,
Yeah.
so, so let's just kind of back up a little bit to Prayer for Solo Clarinet, the opening piece,
Okay.
2014. And as you said, it's the most recent piece on the CD, composed for clarinetist Guy Yehuda.
Uh-huh.
Here's what here and wonder. I'm a clarinetist.
Yeah.
Richard Stoltzman had me for a while, and then I escaped to conducting. So I've always been a reluctant clarinetist.
I've met Richard. He's a wonderful player.
Yeah, yeah. But when he said, "Oh, okay," I was at Cal Arts, and when Richard Stoltzman said, "Okay, now we will learn how to make our own reeds," I,
Ooh.
that's when I thought, no, 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 no. Get me to my conducting teacher. Okay, I'm somewhat kidding. Anyway, bottom line is there are so many wonderful effects and beautiful sounds. Can you explain me a little bit about this technique that creates two pitches simultaneously? Because that device is used, is it not, or am I out of my mind?
Um, well, I know that the clarinet, I guess you call it, overblows at the 12th. So that's the only thing I can really think of that, yeah, has to do with creating two pitches at once. It's really written as the lower note with an accent and then very softly to intone up a 12th.
But
I
can you
would
do
try
that
to
without
sing
the
it for you,
without?
but I really probably could.
Well, I was just wondering. In other words, is that a technique to get that 12th, or can one do that? And I'm speaking as a apparently bad clarinetist.
Uh-huh. Well, I found it to be the easiest thing. He said, if it had been another interval,
Uh,
but it's really on the in the harmonic series.
Yeah,
So
so it works.
it just kind of happens.
Well, it
Uh,
makes a wonderful effect, that's for sure.
yeah, I was a little surprised. Isn't that nice to be surprised by something like
Yeah.
that? I knew, I wasn't sure what would happen but
And
when he
I
did it for me, I said, "Gee, that sounds great."
and I also love the way, and you were going to correct me if I'm mishearing, but I love the way, and I have a hard time describing, but the way you can turn the pitch. You know what I mean? There's where the pitch goes down a quarter tone, let's say, and I
Oh,
love
I
that. I
think
think I'm
that's
hearing it occasionally.
I think that's his bringing to bear a little. See, I was trying to, in an abstract way, make use of what do I want to say, of klezmer or something like that, but
But it
not
isn't.
folk music, folk
Yeah,
wind playing,
yeah, that's right.
and so he just rolled with that, and he made that happen. Yeah,
So this was his own
actually,
kind of
artistry to clarinetist, really.
boy, absolutely fabulous. Speaking of intuitive playing,
Uh, uh,
maybe intuitive playing and then some in terms of if I understood you correctly, he added a little color here, a little something there occasionally. Yeah.
that piece has been played by three or four other people, and he still plays the best.
You know, and you never know. People can in all goodwill play a piece of contemporary music, and it's just fine. And then somebody will play it, and it's exactly right. Suddenly you hear everything, and I think that's
Yeah,
what you have
yeah.
in this clarinet. I,
I think that's true of everything. Actually, I teach piano here at UNF also. I teach beginning composition, but we don't even have a composition degree. So I'm responsible for the piano area, my colleague and I. And that's true of a piece by Beethoven or Chopin or something. Every once in a while,
of course.
you'll hear someone take it and say, "Ha, I never thought of doing that, but oh, that works beautifully." You
Exactly
know,
right.
you own that piece.
Yeah.
And that's great.
Isn't it strange? And that's the magic. It's
It
it,
is.
it's also the magic from
Word for it.
composers. By the way, I'm speaking to a composer again, so tell me, come on, tell me true, which is tell me now, because I know several composers and I'm convinced of it. You kind of hide stuff. You kind of wait to see if people discover things or not.
Well, maybe subconsciously, not, I don't think consciously, but
That would be too evil.
what kinds of things are you thinking of being hidden?
Well, I'm in your case, I think you're extremely straightforward, really. Uh,
Uh,
but just that idea, because I've been leery of composers ever since I really started to get to know one or two, and I know that they look at that you composers look at us with that sort of benign Buddha-like expression, after a performance, and I can see your brain is just waiting for somebody to indicate they actually got it.
they caught the truth.
So
That may be, yeah, in certain places. I don't know.
let me see
Um,
what else I can ask you about. Well, let's look at Bright-Eyed Fancy for violin, cello, and piano.
uh-huh.
Written for the Florida Trio, apparently in 2008. Have I got that about right?
Right. Yeah. Which no longer well, we all exist, but we are not a group anymore.
Disembodied. I think the word is the Florida Trio now disembodied, but still
There
alive.
you
Anyway,
go. Well, and
what was
that's
that backstory?
uh, Bright Eyed Fancy. The title is something that I read in Blake, and it had to do with the muse, whom he called Bright Eyed Fancy. And I thought, oh, I've written several pieces that I called instead of Fantasia Fancy. That's that's a nice turn of whatever that is, that poetic ambiguity or something. So I decided to call it Bright Eyed Fancy. And then that brought me to combining. I think of myself as a pluralist. I try to pull a lot of different things together. I'm inspired sometimes by world musics, like like the prayer. As I said, it has elements of Jewish music in it. This has Anglican hymnody in it, a couple of the themes, late romantic kind of classical something, I don't know, influence, impressionism,
Yes.
and as you were saying, jazz.
By
Now,
the way, I was just ticking these off as you were saying it because I in my notes I have that
uh,
and I keep using the word I like the idea of sequence. This piece is a series of sequences it seems to me because of these character changes. I don't know.
I keep trying in certain episodes of the piece to combine at least two elements or put them in very quick juxtaposition. And then it's like challenging myself to bring it all to a unity. Um,
Yes, the architecture of it
I
all.
should say who those people are. Simon Chow is the violinist. He's on our faculty. Nick Curry is our cellist, and me. And that's a trio. I write a lot for people that I know.
Of course.
Sometimes I just write a piece because I feel the need to write the piece, and I don't know if it's going to be performed or not. Or I go looking for performers, afterwards. But
This is, by the way, everybody is known as the masochism of composers, like composing an opera. 8 years, two
it really,
performances.
yeah, yeah, and then go around with your opera under your arm and try to get. Yeah, that's
Now,
hard.
let me ask this about this piece, and I think that I know better, but I want to ask it anyway because again, we are looking at this wonderful kind of interesting mix of jazz and wonderful classical writing. You didn't get the DMA from Yale for nothing, but my question to you, I hope I don't sound too stupid, is that in this particular piece, is it all written, or is there any free improv?
No,
It's all
none.
written.
It's all written down. And that's one thing about Third Stream. I think some people had the idea that some of it should be improv. And sometimes I do that. Now, I will say, and this is another piece that you mentioned, the Child's Play
We just
for clarinet and tenor, that does have some improv in it. Only in a couple of places, but there was one 30-second area, which is really interesting. They just did their own thing. I gave them instructions as to how I wanted it to transform and what should happen, but they did it. And it's interesting how it all hung together. It sounds like it's written. But what I was trying in the Bright Eyed Fancy to do was to write music that sounded like it was improvised.
And believe me, I think, and just to come to full stop for a second about Third Stream, I think you got it right. I'm
Uh,
not sure. I'm new to discovering this whole idea, and as I told you before we taped, all these wonderful young artists are now really freely improvising. They're taking sati and playing with sati in a very serious but also improvised manner. But I have a feeling we're talking Gunther Schuller. We're not talking anybody. Gunther Schuller, and I have a feeling that his real idea about Third Stream was literally a written meshing of these two ideas. In other words, written even improv. Not to say that it's
mm,
tied down or your hands are tied behind your back, but I think I agree with you in that I think the initial idea was for anybody in 28, 26 to open the thing up and be able to play it.
yes. Well, I think you're right. And I think both approaches, I mean, it's all music.
Oh yeah,
Actually, this is a good opportunity for me to say I teach one mandatory course to all performance majors here at UNF, which is improvisation. And most of these kids have never improvised.
mandatory. You said that's the change.
Yeah. And the idea is in this new world, you really have to know how to improvise a bit, and you have to not be afraid to try, and to fail and to try again. But the thing is, I tell my kids the first couple classes, you really have to get back to where when you first entered music and you just thought it was wonderful and you just wanted to express yourself, or maybe even when you were a toddler and just wanted to sing and you just sang anything and you did nobody told you it was right or wrong and you didn't think about notes or rhythms, you just made music, you expressed yourself. And I believe that it's crucial for kids to really play particularly late romantic music well, because you're supposed to take that Rachmaninoff prelude and shape it and make something happen with it, not to just play the right notes and rhythms as notated, because you can listen to the master do it and it's not playing exactly what's there. And you listen to two or three recordings and it's never the same. So how about that?
Well, well done, Doctor. I'm glad somebody's in charge down there. Uh, and the catch is, a part of me has been in regret in my old age because I have been fearful that when I entered as a music major at 19, I knew the repertoire already. You know, we both know that kids enter colleges and have no idea of just even the classical repertoire. But you
Sure.
know what? Nothing's been harmed. Lots of new directions have developed out of that, new interests and so on. So I think it's all good,
I
even
do.
better. Yeah. Okay. Uh, excuse me. About Child's Play, I'm holding down a cough here for a second. It just I loved it. Watching clouds, for example, sustained floating tones, literally, all that good stuff. And Child's Play, by the way, is for clarinet and tenor saxophone, as we discussed. But let's talk a little bit about Funny Faces. Do you remember Funny Faces? I've got triple crosses next to it.
I do. Yeah. I wish I had
You know,
scored.
let me
Yeah.
between those two instruments, this distorted humor and laughter, this awkwardness, laughter is hilarious. The effects are so wonderful. I mean, talk about composing.
Uh,
That's what it's about. You created an entire scena, if you will, a scene at a circus with just that movement from Child's Play, Funny Faces.
well, I'm glad you like that. I and I did, if I'm not mistaken, write above the score for each of the players that they should sound as if they're laughing. And yeah,
And that's
I
hard to write.
tried to find adjectives to say you're now making a face that's grotesque. You're now laughing at the grotesque face.
But not only that, writing it, making it happen on the
Well,
page.
I suppose, yeah, yeah.
I mean, those
It,
are tricks, interesting tricks. I have no idea how you did it.
at this point, I don't either. You know, I've written so much, and it's funny. That's only 4 or 5 years ago. But I know I'd look at the score and say, "Huh, not bad. How about that?" But I don't remember doing it
But
exactly.
nothing about changing. After years going back and going, oh, that is just horrid. I think I'll change. You don't want to ever touch stuff again, right? Because it
Some
could go on forever.
with some pieces, definitely. I mean, I've rewritten some things 3 or 4 times. Well, I should say I've started pieces 3 or 4 different times, and even over the course of 20 years, and then finally, I don't know, got on the right track, and it just went through.
So they just
But
sit around, and from time to time you'll pull them off the shelf and fiddle for a bit, and then throw them back on the shelf.
well, it doesn't.
Continue.
I mean, this is maybe 10% of the time, but I can think of 3 or 4 really good pieces that were really hard won. I mean, I almost gave up on them, and often I sit down and I write very fluidly. So I don't know. Actually, the last piece here, the sonata and
The
fancy
sonata.
vibes and piano, um,
Beautiful
is
combination
a
of them.
kind of a rewrite. I wrote a vibe sonata back in the 80s, and the last two movements of this are the last two movements of that. And I just threw away the first two movements because they were too long. They didn't fit. They weren't well. I don't know. I just didn't like them. And I decided only a couple of years before this recording to write a new first movement. So the first movement is a new piece, and the second and third movements are, I don't know how old, 30 years old or something like that.
How
Uh,
Mozartian.
yeah,
How
yeah.
Mozartian. You know, that's the business. Yeah,
Well, it's not. Yeah, if we never talk about that in grad school, none of my teachers talked about doing it that way.
of
But
course not.
that's just the way it worked out for me,
Yeah.
And I'm not afraid to be self-critical. You know, um, sometimes, and it's unfortunate, it can even happen after the first performance. I just say, you know what? That second movement is too blankety blank long. It just doesn't fit.
But
I'm
that
gonna.
is the idea of first performances, come to think of it. you know,
You, yeah,
to finally bring it into the real world and then see, I'm chopping some of that
that's
up.
right. And all of a
Yeah.
sudden, I'm in the audience and I'm realizing the reaction, and I'm thinking about the performers have really done their best with this. It doesn't work, and it's my fault. So I'm going to fix it. You know?
But that's kind of still in the hybrid, you know what I mean? That's sort of right there in the beginnings of a piece. I'm thinking about now if you had gone into the theater and seen that performance 8 years later and gone,
Oh,
oh, you know, it just doesn't. Take it out. I suppose it doesn't matter one way or the other. Whatever improves things for posterity is the most important
yeah,
thing, you know.
yeah. I past a certain point, I'm not sure. Reminds me, short story. I played for Phyllis Curtin in her studio. Played for students once, a famous soprano. She told about Darius Mio had listened to her do some little songs. I think there were settings of recipes, recipes for violin and soprano. And before the performance, they played them for Mio, and he said, after thinking a while, "I wrote this."
This drivel.
So and so, and he said, "It sounds fine to me." He had nothing to say. It was like, "Oh, it's a silly little thing I must have thrown off. I don't remember it." And
It could
yeah,
have been after at the end of a very crazy party too. I have no idea, Darius. Forgive me whether there was, but you know the French. You got to watch out. Listen, I think we'd better run it down. We didn't really get a chance. I wanted to talk a little bit about Mandela for clarinet and piano. Now that is a piece that needs to be performed many, many more times and
oh,
be in the
thank you.
repertoire. I
You're
think.
I
Uh,
wrote that in the 1990s, right after he became president of South Africa.
yeah, and what a
And
story! What a
so that
story!
that was yeah.
And this again is a wonderful narrative. Obviously, it's a narrative. Yes, I mean it's a really historical narrative. What I'm hearing.
In a way, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's meant to be very dramatic. It's a dramatic presentation. Yeah.
It's a beautiful, beautiful piece, if, you know, in terms of solid for the repertoire. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, we're gonna quit. I think did we? What did I miss? By the way, what's the next 5 year plan?
Gee, I don't know. I just finished some seven duets for two violins for some friends, and then of course I just had this recording of the by the Altius Quartet that's going to come out on Parma Records this year, I guess. So
Of what? Anything big? A couple of quartets or what?
I don't even know what other. It's not all my music,
Yeah.
so it's with several other composers, I gather.
But is it your quartet, or is there one quartet? Or?
It's called Three Fantasias. I didn't say fancy this time. Fantasias on African American songs. So there's Swing Low, Sweet Chariot,
Nice.
a work song from a woman's prison. It's from
Uh,
a recording that I heard from the 1940s. Uh, and yeah, I won't try to explain it, but I think it's very
moving.
effective,
It
very
sounds.
moving.
Yeah.
And Short and Bread, which is very virtuosic. And yeah, the piece is just deconstructed completely, but lots of fun and very virtuosic. I think it's a good group. We're still editing it, but I'm pleased.
Oh, they are. I've told you. I think off camera I've reviewed their Shostakovich quartets, the 7, 8, and 9. You know, the deepest, darkest time of the composer's life, really.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, you've got a good quartet to work with
Yeah,
Altius.
they're great. They're
Yeah.
very musical. They're very virtuosic. Lots of energy. Terrific.
Well, I have been talking with composer pianist Gary Smart. We're talking about his 2016 Albany Records released Bright Eyed Fancy, the chamber music of Gary Smart, and we've mentioned the works. I mean, for solo clarinet, for clarinet and piano, for vibraphone and piano, for tenor saxophone and clarinet. I mean, it's just for trio, violoncello and piano. Wonderful, wonderful works of music that are in this Gunther Schuller manner at the highest levels, compositional levels. This mixing of classical and jazz, idioms, ideas, rhythms, fragments, even, you know, typical jazz fragments that appear in the middle of another contemporary work. It's marvelous. Gunther is smiling down upon us, I'm sure. Uh, uh,
So,
just a wonderful CD. Thanks so much for giving me a great piece of your evening down there in Florida. Um, Nice chatting
You're
with
very
you.
kind, Daniel. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, we'll see you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.